And San Francisco police tonight still have no suspects in custody for last night's vicious attack by vandals against the Richelieu Theatre. The attack was triggered by the screening of the controversial film classic Birth of a Nation. Today, members of a group called the International Committee Against Racism told the 10 o'clock news they were responsible for the destruction. About 24 members of the group who had been picketing the theater suddenly stormed inside and caused $5,000 damage. A spokesman for the group said the film was racist and flatters the Klan. They called it a political education. The theater manager said it was vandalism.
They ran into the theater shouting "Death to the Klan," ran down the side aisle, broke through a door, ran up the steps to where the projectionist booth is, simultaneously broke a door through there, and also broke through the glass in which the movie is projected through, and attacked the equipment, jumped in the equipment while the projectionist was trying to fight them off, and they ran out a side door and left.
Well, Beucus said that film was playing to a capacity audience during that attack, and he said there was a potential for a near riot if the people had panicked and stampeded out of the theater. Birth of a Nation has been called both an artistic masterpiece and a work of blatant racism. There will always be a debate on how far art can go in the name of any philosophy of any extreme.
Coming up on segment 2, what the people who made Birth of a Nation think of all the controversy.
The showing of the Klansmen started riots and put blood on the streets was proof beyond proof that it was a great and powerful picture, regardless of what any critic might have to say about it.
A few minutes ago, we had a story about a trashing attack at the Richelieu Theatre in San Francisco. The focus of that attack was a 65-year-old movie, The Birth of a Nation. That movie, originally called The Klansman, is acknowledged as one of the classics of the silent era. It's not the first time that film has caused controversy, though, as Randy Shandabille reports.
Unquestionably, Birth of a Nation is the most controversial movie of all time. Film buffs consider it the definitive picture of the silent era. On the other hand, Birth of a Nation is blatantly racist. It glorifies the Ku Klux Klan. The film was written and directed by D.W. Griffith, a man as important to Hollywood as Thomas Edison was to electricity. Birth of a Nation was Hollywood's first epic. It was the first movie to stage giant battles. Its elaborate costumes and props made it the most expensive film of the era. Strangely, the crew on the film had no idea they were participating in the making of history. In fact, the movie's cameraman said the scope of the movie didn't dawn on him until opening night.
I saw that first night without any inkling of what was coming up, but I sat and watched players come in until the entire orchestra pit was fitted. And I didn't realize until that time that the entire Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra had been hired to play the picture. An unheard of thing. So in came Joe Briel, who had written the score. And when he raised his baton and held it for a moment, and down it came, everything just blew right out of the... Oh, it was the most tremendous gust of sound I'd ever heard.
There had been feature films before, but none with the sweeping drama of Birth of a Nation.
I sat at the end of a row with men, and during parts of that, the whole row shook with their sobs. It was so moving.
Birth of a Nation chronicles the defeat of the South in the Civil War. After the war, blacks were suddenly freed from slavery and given equal rights. Apparently, that was something D.W. Griffith couldn't stomach. He mocked blacks in these caricatures of the Reconstruction South Carolina Assembly. In a rare interview with the master, Griffith tries to put his racism in perspective. His father was a colonel for the defeated rebel army during the Civil War, and Griffith implies that he was just a product of his upbringing.
Oh, I suppose it began when I was a child. I used to get under the table and listen to my father and his friends talk about the battles they'd been through and their struggles. And those things impress you deeply, and I suppose that got into the birth. Oh, that's natural enough, you know, and you've heard your father tell about fighting day after day, night after night, and having nothing to eat but parched corn.
But some things in Birth of a Nation are indefensible. Griffith invented scenes in which white actors, dressed as blacks, acted like utter monsters. White audiences believed those scenes as fact, and so after years of dormancy, the Ku Klux Klan was born again and has been with us ever since. The late novelist Anita Loos talks about what it was like.
The Birth of a Nation created a racist problem in the United States that exploded and caused any number of theaters to cancel the film.
There were massive demonstrations at theaters. Some demonstrations grew into riots.
And the fact that the showing of the Klansmen started riots and put blood on the streets was proof beyond proof that it was a great and powerful picture, regardless of what any critic might have to say about it. The proof was there.
Whatever people feel about the film's politics, Birth of a Nation lives on 65 years later as a classic. It is still shown in theaters around the world, and it still makes some people very angry. The attack on the Richelieu Theatre last night is evidence of that fact. The ruckus over the movie here last night points out a dilemma that has faced filmmakers and artists for decades in this country. In fact, they've been faced with that question ever since before the birth of this nation. That question is, do artists have the right to show their work, even if the message in their work happens to be morally offensive to the community in which they live? In San Francisco, this is Randy Shandabille for Segment 2.
And another question maybe, does anyone have the right to destroy art because they don't agree with it? That's Segment 2.